would start with a sonnet I was describing in the workshop, which is about my father and how he would irritate me as a small boy stirring his tea. And the title means hatred of sound. Misophonia. All through breakfast he makes his teacup chime, plain spoken as a metronome, alarm forcing my back teeth to ache, spoon clenched between his index and thumb, milling lumps of sugar through milk and taupey, mold-stained water. Each cube a bathysphere I'm trapped inside, their hulls hammered by a tinkling maelstrom he slows, speeds up, cacophony in free fall, patience stretched till I'm weightless, aquanaut awash among numb starfish, saucers swamped, mopped up by the Albertan, murky headlines fatal and tossed away before I've time to walk to school alone. Our street a calm uphill curve, death to rhyme. And there's only one rhyme in that poem, rhyme and chime, that I'm aware of, anyway. So I just will read this one. Arrival and departure. My collarbone lightly broken, you took me camping, marine layer damp in my hair as I stepped off the ferry alone, bare-headed, sunburned nose stung by kelp and felt awkward till you stood out from the crowd, waiting for foot traffic to clear customs, calm, sisterly, and pleased I crossed. The sun of the sea's pull, collapsed crash of surf loud in my ears, when years later I'm adrift by your bed, as two nurses unhook you, your body a raft too wrecked to hold you, here unanchored as you seldom were, tipped safe with provisions stowed and course plotted. Our fingers slip knot, my grip can't keep taut. And this is another sonnet about my father. It's based on a letter that I found among his papers, where he describes watching a plane being shot out of the sky over London in 1940. And it begins with a epigraph from the British novelist Henry Green. Flume came to be called a light. They talked of putting the light out. Bombardment, September 1940. Stunned, it hangs above the panicked city, aerolons rimmed with fire, shorn fuselage igniting as it cartwheels, flinty edge of the nose wedging through a vacancy, braced between facades on your narrow street. You angled from a tall window slit, large void above, the skies a spotlit cortege, somersaulting smoke corkscrewing from wings freed to smash on impact, the wrapped blocks beyond Russell Square, after martyring the docks, an embered fall you wrote your mother of before signing up, nerve corresponding to nothing you later flew, a flame caught in ink and lit years later on to spark my awe. So many years ago, a friend of mine gave me this bracelet, which had belonged to a friend of ours who died of AIDS as a young man. And she gave me this bracelet because it reminded me of him. She worked in New York. She was in the theater, as were most of her friends. And I remember when I met Maggie in 1991, she told me she lost 30 of her friends to the disease. So she felt like her whole peer group had been wiped out. And so when I started this sonnet project, where I've written 336 sonnets, on my way to 366. I keep looking for subjects. And I thought about this bracelet and wrote the sonnet, and I've been wearing the bracelet ever since. Kenny's bracelet. A twined and hammered twist of what's left of him. Nickel, copper, brass. A glinting, soldered echo you heard, found as his apartment was emptied out. Noise-tamped studio dim with what became the East Village. Retro when gentrified, how he lived forgotten. What killed him, a virus adoring thousands like me. An artifact, the past scarecrow, outstaring fear. Garbage cleared from Broadway, the ignored way he died, not how we are let go when dying now. His bracelet, a scar you wrap around my wrist, longing reclaimed. A molten link my skin warms, how like me he used to sit, hands clasped about one knee. I'm going to read 2 more sonnets, then I'm going to save one for the end after I've read from essays. And so this is about a friend of mine who, well, he'll recognize himself. It's interior design challenged. Feng Shui unbound. You longed for a wingback chair and window, never found the ideal matching pair. Countless arms too low, seats soft, slanted glare, double pane of glass lit across your floor, outlining the slim hinting solitude you kept on wearing, knot in your single necktie, rubbing silk to knot, prodigal in all but time, the gauzy interlude we would call our youth fading back toward upholstered layers of dusk, men you'd looked for in sunless bars, leading to candlelit meals served to old friends, laid in wines uncorked at the large makeshift table you adore. Straight back chair pulled in close, the latest fit. And many of you will recognize the subject of this poem from the headlines of the last year. Coda for the Victims. It takes no self-consciousness to guess how a landscaper could pick them. The tapped swipe of their profiles, such null bodies, his type, disassembled already by the cropped gaze of their smartphones, parts isolated from their eyes, shaved or engorged, trunks of brown skin, oceans away from home or ground down by what being born here has made them prey to. Invasive species, he would text lines and root from cover with the funk of sex. Horny men used to rough white hands, not death. Stripped limbs he disjointed before he consigns them to mulch he rakes flat. Unseen index of those too few miss, us all psychopaths. So, my book of essays, We Are Not Avatars. It's not a book I ever thought I would have an opportunity to publish until I wrote 2 essays for Hamilton Arts and Letters, commissioned by Shane Nielsen, some of whom you will know. And he asked to see more of my essays, and before I really had time to think about it, he found me the publisher. It's the easiest book. And then we spent the last year going through the 24 pieces that are in it that I wrote over the last 25 years. And it's kind of in a way, it's kind of a literary memoir in a way. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you bits of the introduction, and then 2 excerpts from other essays. So I'm kind of jumping through the introduction. And let's hope I can follow my crib notes. And so I call the introduction, How I Came to Lead an Authentic Life. Over a recent Americano and Discovery coffee on Oak Bay Avenue in rainy Victoria, I read The Ballad of Reading Jail for the first time. Why I had neglected one of Oscar Wilde's last great works till now eludes excuse. Wilde wrote this long narrative poem about the execution of a fellow prisoner soon after his release from prison on May 19, 1897. His sentence of 2 years hard labor for gross indecency, a legal euphemism for sexual activity between men excluding sodomy, had changed him profoundly. Initially published in an edition of 800 copies in 1898, the year my maternal grandmother was born, Wilde's poem would remain a disturbing touchstone for many in the watershed years to come. It was into Wilde's legacy of brokenness and resilience that I was born in 1957, 60 years after the poem's complete composition, the year the British government released the report of the Departmental Committee on Homosexual Offences and Prostitutes, like that group put together. Better known as the Wolfenden Report, named after Sir John Wolfenden, the committee's chair, who was also rumored to have a gay son. It took another decade for the British government to act on Sir John's recommendation to lift the criminal prescriptions against same-sex relations between consenting adults, albeit only in England and Wales, once the amending legislation was passed. Apart from chemical sterilization offered to convicted gay men like Alan Turing as an alternative to prison, this repeal stood as the first significant change in our treatment since the laws under which Wilde had been prosecuted came into force in 1885. In 1967, I wouldn't have understood what such a legal change would mean for people like me, since I was only 10 years old. Nor would I have been aware that Canada had then started what turned out to be a 2-year-long debate about making similar changes to our own statutes. The many new municipal parks, stadia, art centers, and eternal flames unveiled as nation-building initiatives during Centennial Year would have more rapidly and readily caught my imagination. Of course, the liberalizations beginning to see light in the 1960s were decades in the making. As an adult, it took me years of reading to realize I had grown up against a backdrop of change that made the life I have led and the writing career I have pursued abundantly tenable. The history made around me as a child was never integrated into my junior high or high school curriculum. Buggery's virtues were never once debated in health class. Nor was an adolescent bedroom in 1970s Northwest Calgary, where I hid behind a camouflage of the Lord of the Rings, blacklight posters, Melanie LPs, and a portable phonograph, a good place to join the debate. That said, I remember a premonition of self-awareness charged through me when my parents took me to see the film adaptation of Cabaret when I was in grade 10. The Philip of Liza Minnelli's Emerald Fingernails and Joel Gray's conspiratorial leer signaled to me in a code I did not then attempt to crack that my future could be other than what society kept telling me it should be. I became a lifelong devotee of the novels of Christopher Isherwood, upon whose work the stage play, musical, and film are based, though I'd later learn he disparaged every theatrical and cinematic incarnation of his iconic characters, Sally Bowles and the cipher narrator he'd based on himself. Steady and slow, mine was an ever more literary coming out. It took a while for it to register that the subtle subtext of everything Isherwood wrote pertained to me. When I was a university student, I came across his 1976 memoir, Christopher and His Kind, which retells the stories he recounted in Mr. Norris Changes Trains and Goodbye to Berlin, the two books upon which Cabaret is based. This time, he does not queer-wash his experiences, and instead gives prominence to the not-so-underground gay culture of Germany during the closing libertine years of the Weimar Republic. Though I had come out to myself years before, in poems I had been slow to share, I started coming out fashionably late in the flesh. I was 28, it was 1985, and by then the AIDS epidemic had gained the force of a juggernaut. The sentence the virus imposed was not 2 years of hard labor, but a death no doctor could commute. There was sex, of course, and I found safety in numbers. I had just moved to Ottawa, Mecca of librarians. At library school, I'd read David Leavitt's Family Dancing and Jane Rule's Desert of the Heart. I joined a gay men's discussion group and later a queer swim team and a gay men's reading circle that met at After Stonewall, Ottawa's now defunct LGBT bookstore. For more than a decade, we weighed the merits of books like Alan Hollinghurst's The Swimming Pool Library, Lillian Faderman's Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers, Tom Gunn's The Men with Night Sweats, Leslie Feinberg's Stone Butch Blues, Simon LeVay's Queer Science, and Tony Kushner's Angels in America, among other countless novels, histories, collections of poetries, memoirs, theatrical works, and plays. It was both higher education and basic training. We followed the store as it moved from basement to second floor to storefront locations. And because of David Rimmer's welcoming smile, it was a social hub for more than just us. In 1990, soon after he opened the store, David hosted what would be his first book signing when Corey Press published Great Men, my fourth book of poems. We became friends and fell into the habit of having dinner at a nearby Vietnamese restaurant every second Tuesday of the month before going back to the store to set up chairs. Ideas arising from the books the group discussed would take a second breath in my poems. It's appropriate. We Are Not Avatars publication falls immediately before the 50th anniversary in June 2019 of the decriminalization of same-sex relations between consenting adults in Canada. The writing of the book's contents overlaps with the last 20 years of this progressively more enlightened half-century. While I have revised these essays for republication and ordered them thematically rather than chronologically, they reflect my thoughts when each was written, and I hope, if read together, trace how my thinking grows and even changed. No longer am I among the outcasts wild and so painfully mourned. Maybe I never had been. So I'm going to skip to an excerpt of an essay called The Pain Closet, outtakes from a phantom journal. And it's about chronic pain, which I have the challenge to live with. And my sister, who, the poem about the arrival and departure, she was a doctor, and I was very fortunate that she was also a chronic pain specialist. And one day she took me to, I was visiting Calgary, and she took me to one of the Body Worlds exhibitions because she wanted to show me where my physiology had gone wrong. At least that's how I interpreted it. So I'm just going to read that little bit. In 2010, Pam took me to see one of the Body Worlds exhibits that continue to circulate around the globe. That summer, it stopped for 3 months at the Calgary Science Centre, billed as, and this is in quotes, the original exhibition of real human bodies, end of quote. It displayed corpses that people who'd once occupied them had bequeathed to the Institute for Plastination in Heidelberg, Germany. They had declared during their lifetimes that their bodies should be made available after their deaths for the qualifications of physicians and instruction of laypersons. Their selfless donations allow the Institute to gain unique insight into human bodies. Each one is preserved, dissected, and posed to reveal a particular condition or aspect of biomechanics for public consumption. As a tennis player, for example, or a dancer, the body freeze-framed at a particular point of motion. Pam wanted to walk me through my own malady, in a sense, by pointing out the various soft tissue structures and musculoskeletal arrangements implicated in my pain, hoping it would be enlightening for me to see what was happening to me from the inside out, rather than just suffering its insidious effects. Though the majority of the dioramas were mawkish and the use of the donated bodies a trivializing of their humanity, I found one display astonishing. The deceased's nervous system had been painstakingly excised in its entirety from the flesh and hung from above like an unclothed wire mannequin. The spotlit nerves looked as warm as candle wax. As they converged and diverged from one another, meshing together or thinning out, frail and fugitive as rootless. The nervous system they wove into a single whole looked like an array of cities viewed from space, glowing through the dark with the light of human connectivity. The lower torso was at its most brilliant in the pelvis, a near equal to the brain's luminous and distant megalopolis. Profoundly moved, I later drew upon my awe to compose one section of my poem, A Built Environment, found in Polari and written in heroic couplets. What tool will strip free, cut, What tool will strip free, cut, shorted out nerves, conduits of feeling few alive observe, pared from bone, but as they're picked apart from flesh, the exposed ache unrolls a chart of failed continents, painful, tender wastes, glimpsed from space, built-up expanses laced with nightmare glimmers as snarled village slights, converging at the groin in blinding light, a blaze of agonized urban sprawl mapped by satellite agonies in time lapse. This afternoon, after a few hours' work on a new poem, I went for a swim. Lap after lap, I could not extinguish the fire that sitting at my computer had sent roaring up my legs from ankle to groin with such agility that like a fleeing, terrorized bear lit on fire, it could leap across my pain-free back to my arms as if across a useless fire break. I have had to modify the way I swim. The breaststroke's whip kick bothers my pelvic floor. Flip turns are too risky. The flip itself is manageable, but pushing off the wall will irritate my SI joints. Long ago, I stopped swimming, went 1,500 meters without pause. Now I alternate between front crawl and backstroke. Every 5 lengths, I walk to repeating this routine 9 times. Someone has pointed out to me I'm obsessed with numbers. I said a sonnet is 140 syllables, so there you go. The touch turns at either wall are half rhymes, in contrast to the rime riche of the flips. In the 60-line poem, I swim 3 to 4 times per week. Swimming and poetry require discipline, and it's a balancing act for both. How much should I ignore my pain? How far should I give into it? When I was writer-in-residence at Memorial University in Newfoundland, the Editors Association asked me to deliver a talk on how to edit poetry. How do you write about something like that? I did. And I'm just going to read a very short excerpt about it. And it's my theory of how, my theory of poetry. And the essay is called Inside the Blind. After years of writing poetry myself, I have come to recognize that each poem is a wild animal at liberty somewhere in nature, no matter how each poet conceives of nature. I may be sitting at my desk or with my laptop in Starbucks, but in my imagination, I am a zoologist out in the field. I may have insinuated myself up in a tree or hid among the rushes at the slough's end. But in either case, I am behind a blind of my own construction, trying not to be noticed while jotting down careful, dare I say artful, impressions of the shy creature on the other side. As a poet-zoologist, I apply all my powers of observation as if I were in the Poetry Olympics. I keep adapting how to use my growing array of tools because the creature I am observing keeps changing, belongs to a mistakenly identified species. I am humble, if emboldened, before the enormity of the task I have set myself, which is to catch every verbal twitch the poem makes. It takes patience as well as skill to catch a true likeness, to put into words everything that I've learned through my careful watching. It may take several attempts back behind the blind, however long between visits, to get the poem down right. This patience can involve days, months, or years, with me climbing into the same tree ever more liberally or arithmetically countless times without scaring off the poem in order to see it in all its moods and habits. What's curious is that however often I am up in the tree or up to my eyes in the slough, the poem is always going about its business. I may change. What I may know about poetry may change, but the poem does not change, only my powers of observation and transcription. It's these changing powers that can make the poem seem different from when it was first seen. And these differences are worth noting too, for they are part of the experience of observing it as well. Most importantly, this kind of patience and discipline involves something I will call quietude. I am most successful when I am most still. My presence inside the blind must seem ever more tenuous in order to catch the subtlest and most telling qualities of the poem's comportment. It's almost as if I have to find a way to see how the poem would behave without my presence. The poem is the transcript of all modes of observation, thematic, prosodic, musical, and linguistic. Whatever filters I drop before the lens of my field camera or call up on my iPhone, I am sure none of this sounds very spontaneous, that the poem will end up being a still life of some sort, but the key to my task as a poet is to instill into my final draft the poem's spontaneity and vitality through my patient, selfless craft of observation and transcription. This selflessness is perhaps why I think of poetry, even the most personal of poetries, as expression, not self-expression. So I'm going to read that final sonnet. And it opens with an epigraph from Margaret Atwood from a poem in her book, True Stories. And that epigraph is, "Why then tell me there is something wrong with my eyes?" An epistemology. The world, when seen clearly, the poet says, is viewed through tears. But my eyes, long bloodshot, have dried, are lucid or glassy, will not look or look away. What's seen, not erased by being glanced at or turned away from. Plain sight making what is glimpsed proximate or distant. Love and hate, two intimates, chance accommodates, each of which amend what my bathroom mirror frames while I shave, a life sentence of mirrors in time lapse, the years a flip book of self-portraits, grasped or left dog-eared, sped up moral sense, graved in my eyes, the world slowed down by gazing inward, careful, caring, realized through reflecting. Thank you for listening.